Tim, here we are. We're back. We're talking facility design in season 6. Today we are talking our training plan rationale versus the actual execution of that training plan. So what does that mean even?
There is the program that you would like to do versus the program that you can actually do. And saying it in that way is really important because as we start to really break down facility design, the truth of the matter is most of the time we inherit the weight room that we're going to be working within. That very little actual strength conditioning is designing the perfect weight room to accommodate your program. So we have to adapt our program to whatever weight room we're working within. And that's just the nature of the beast. So there's the on paper, what I would aspire to do for a strength and conditioning program and whatever I adhere to from a philosophy standpoint, or in some cases an ideology. There is that, and then there's the realistic. And let's just say this extremely simply, right? I am a Olympic lifting coach, and I have a bunch of monoliths and a bunch of Texas bars and metal plates. You're gonna have to adapt to that environment, and this happens all the time. There are more situations than not that is the case. But doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some sort of ideal training plan. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some sort of philosophy that you really adhere to. But it also means that you need to be adaptable to multiple environments. And one thing I always advocate for young strength and conditioning coaches is get as much experience in really shitty situations as humanly possible. Work in high school, work JUCO, work NIA, work on crappy facilities, just to become more of a adaptable organism to a environment. And when you do have the opportunity to either design a weight room or be in a weight room that has everything that you would ever imagine and therefore need, you'll be that much more better for it. But you need to demonstrate a certain level of creativity, a certain level of ingenuity, a certain level of just being humble and adaptable. Because more times than not, there's not a lot of congruence with the training plan you would like to do with the actual ability to execute on that program.
How do we go about developing our philosophy? It sounds like that's where we really need to start before we get into the other piece of where our philosophy meets the facility. So how do we really go about diving in and getting a solid philosophy?
Yeah, really good question, because that's the thing that I think more times than not we don't really evaluate, and sometimes we just fall into it, right? You were my athlete, you work under me, and you're like, guy has a lot of confidence and great success. I'm just going to replicate what he did. So it becomes grandfathered, right? And we just start to perpetuate this cycle of Tim was successful and everyone that ever worked with him or for him is now going to replicate whatever he did. And then they get into their own situation and they struggle to adapt it to their environment. It could be I'm a tour de force and I just have this unbelievable ability to push a program through no matter what the circumstances, or I just worked really hard and I got myself in favorable situations where I can design the weight room exactly the way I want and it's perfectly synchronized with the weight room, the program that I'm going to do. But on the other end of it, I think it just comes down to a lot more simple in terms of, okay, what is going to have the biggest return on investment from the time that you probably are going to be allotted 2 to 3 hours a week? And usually that falls into high ROI movements like compound, so multi-joint, closed kinetic chain, feet on the ground. And then we look at through some sort of principle based of, hey, I want to use progression, progressive overload, individuality, specificity, reversibility, diminishing returns. Then I want to look at it from, okay, well, there's going to be certain in terms of, I got to hit all 3 planes of motion. I got to hit all 3 vectors. I got to be able to do this in some sort of way that's organized, synchronized, that actually leads to some sort of outcome. And that part is, from a philosophy standpoint, that's a big checkpoint, right? So if we look at humans are complex, meaning that we procure energy from the outside world, we're not a closed loop. So that means we are instantly in this state of a lot of variance, or this butterfly effect of every single time we do something with someone. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but what there is a lot of certainty is in terms of principles and the value of doing compound closed kinetic chain exercises, the value of hitting in all 3 planes and 3 vectors. So you center your philosophy off these big checklists that you got to do, because there's infinite number of things that you could do. And what that does is starts to shape, okay, well, how do I form my philosophy in a group setting? Because that's the reality of it. Or working with one-on-one, I guess, in some circumstances. But majority of us are going to have to be more economical with our time and have some sort of athlete to coach ratio that's congruent with the amount you can charge individual people or the amount the school can pay for per person per group to allow for whatever it is to facilitate your program. But then we start to look at your philosophy mixed with this maybe larger group than we are going to be really accustomed to or comfortable with. And you start to look at your truths of, hey, my program is built around compound closed kinetic chain exercises. Notice how in there I did not say you got to pick an exercise. It's just compound closed kinetic chain is usually going to have a little bit more ROI from a limited number of time with a larger number of people. And that's the game here, is trying to zero in on a philosophy that's going to have as big of an impact systemically as humanly possible. Now, when you start to look at your philosophy, the philosophy has to be coming down to is what are you going to have conviction in holding a standard with? And there's always going to be exceptions, right? That outliers create these rules, right? So we look at someone that maybe has back injury or maybe is a motor moron or has never been exposed to a weight room before, that, hey, I'm still safe if I say that I'm going to do a compound multi-joint movement with a closed kinetic chain type of setup with people with back pain, with some sort of limited experience or very poor motor patterning, because it doesn't really lock me into an exercise. And there's a difference between a philosophy and an ideology. And I look at the big three or big four, I should say, in strength conditioning that we're comparable to when we look at powerlifting, Olympic lifting, bodybuilding, and track and field, that we are a lot of derivatives of that, and we pull from that, and we kind of hang our hat on that more so than actually a more higher level universal approach to training. And when you think about your philosophy, you want to avoid getting put into a corner and being pigeonholed into something that you can't get out of. Because if you think of yourself as this person that is identifiable with a particular style of training, you're going to be extremely limited to the people you can serve, because that is a hammer and nail syndrome that, quite frankly, just limits your potential to help and serve, as well as honestly providing as quality of a service as you possibly can. So philosophy wise, coming back to the original question, how do you select it? You want to think about things that are going to have the biggest ROI. You want to think about things that are going to have the biggest universal reach without limiting your potential. And then you want to think about things that are adaptable to any environment. And you give me a field with some kettlebells and some dumbbells, I could do my philosophy. You give me the best weight room in the entire world, I can do my philosophy. Now, when I get into it, it doesn't limit my ability to find creative solutions to unique problems, because these problems are coming, whether you think they are or not. That you think you've cracked the unified theory of training with your robust level program, you're absolutely making the biggest mistake in thinking that you understand what's going to happen in the future based off of what you've done in the previously or have had success with. And your philosophy needs to have a universality to it. It needs to have a large systemic reach. It needs to have a profound level of impact. And it needs to be adaptable to multiple environments, and giving you enough humility to say that I don't know what will happen. I just know today I'm going to start with this, and I have the ability to refine, not change, refine. There's a big difference there towards what that person is. And that has a huge impact on how you capitalize and leverage what kind of weight room you're going to be working with, or how you want to organize that weight room.
So how can we, let's say we inherited a weight room, marry that philosophy, and be adaptable? Like, can you give us some real world examples there?
Yeah. Most weight rooms now in modern sports or college strength conditioning or team sector strength conditioning, whether high school, college, and pro, are going to have this pretense that it's going to be rack based, and it's going to have a collection of barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, med balls, maybe some open space like a turf or a little bit of a warm up area. But generally speaking, that is the structure of a weight room now. And I think that's a lot of effort and a lot of time put in for multiple decades at this point. But at one point, it was, I inherited a weight room with a bunch of machines that I'll never use, or my racks are shit, or I don't have enough space, or the ceiling height's too low, or the ingress egress sucks, or just wasn't well thought out. There's a column in the middle of like a turf that just doesn't make any sense, and I can't do any sprint work or plyo work or change the direction of work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when we think about, okay, I have my philosophy, and I've said it now, but I'll say it in a more succinct fashion. It's compound, closed kinetic chain exercises done with first principles of training and physics through all three planes of motion, as well as all three vectors. And looking at that in terms of, okay, what am I going to need? And I'm going to need some sort of gravity-based resistance, like a barbell, dumbbell, kettlebell. I'm going to need some place to make it efficient to pull in and out of, like a rack. Okay, so give me some racks. Well, how many athletes do I have at a given time? So if, let's say I work with groups of 18, a good rack arrangement for me would be about 3 people. That fits this kind of system of, I want to have a 1-to-3 work to rest ratio pretty much most of the time with anaerobic alactic exercise I'm doing within the weight room. All right, well, that works out in a nice way. If I had to go 4, I just need to be a little bit more adaptable because, I got to go 24 people in a group, or maybe I need to go less. I need to go 12. So I need to build in and be more mandating of rest periods. But organically, I think at that, okay, I'm going to work with generally 3 people to rack. So if I have a group of 18, I need 6 racks. If I have a group of 12, I need, what's that math? 3 racks. And if I have a group of 24, I'm going to need 8 racks, et cetera, all the way out. And I start to break that down in terms of, I really want to understand, what is it actually that I'm going to be working with in a certain group time? What is it do I have from a piece of equipment? And how do I marry whatever it is that I would like to do from a philosophy to these logistics that I need to think about? And that gets into the, what can I actually execute on? And a great example of this is, we have an injured athlete. An intern comes up to me and he says, hey, they hurt their wrist. They can't do bench. I was going to do some sort of pec fly. And we don't have a pec deck or a pec fly machine. I'm not against the logic of it, but you realize how, one, it's a clear lack there of awareness of what we do or don't have. 2, not really understanding, if we don't have the tool, and it's a real story, by the way, if we don't have the tool, therefore it is actually a unproductive and toxic relationship with the training program that we have. Because it means that we're not really appreciative of what we do have, and not sitting here thinking about, oh man, I wish I had this or wish I had that. We're saying, okay, I got what I got and I'm going to make the most of it. And instead of saying, I would like to do a pec deck, I just need to find a lateralization or a regression that would fit that athlete's need with a sprained wrist. And it might not be a barbell, but it could be a dumbbell, or it could be unilateral, or maybe just putting that wrist in a fixed position, like in a push-up, in a neutral grip push-up. It could be a whole host of things. Who knows? But the truth is that connection to your weight room and saying, I have what I have, and that's not, at least on a short-term basis, changeable. And I have my philosophy, and I want to synchronize them together. And more times than not, if I want to do ground-based closed kinetic chain exercises, I need to align my racks. I need to make sure that I have equipment there. I need to look at the subsidiary type of programming I do off that rack. So if I'm doing an antagonist pairings, like an A1, A2, and I want to do a squat with some sort of upper body pull, okay, how far are they away from the dumbbells? And does the really strong people who need the really heavy dumbbells on the way opposite end of the room for the heavy dumbbells, okay, I need to move that person down there, because it's easier to move them down the racks as opposed to the dumbbells all the way down there. And it gets into this monotony and the ergonomics of setting up a group. Like, you want a surefire way to burn out your staff, and just have a very poorly thought out program design based off your equipment and where it's located and where it's like situated. And if our staff every single day is just breaking their back to set up and break down a weight room that's just not really well thought out in connection to the actual program, you're going to have a high burnout and poor performance. And all that stuff matters in the grand scheme of things. But when we're looking at a philosophy, we look at what we have from a weight room. It's about just simply looking at this. What are the bottlenecks? What are the constraints? What is it that I really absolutely need to accomplish? And trying to figure out the best solution. It's not the perfect solution, but the best solution for that problem.
What are some ways that you've found of like working through some of those bottlenecks, other than like trial and error, or like is it yourself and your staff going through the lifts? How do you work to find those and be proactive versus reactive with some of those things?
There's going to be more of a, I think, intuition. So if we go to the Dreyfus model, which we talk about in our foundations course, that novices rely on binary yes/no rules. Experts rely on intuition, meaning that I can walk into a weight room and feel it not being the way I want it to be. versus young strength coaches or novice strength coaches will have a harder time associating with the feeling with potentially the problem, or even better, a solution. So as you're going through it, there's a intrinsic, this doesn't feel right. It feels like it's awkward. It feels like it's not really the best layout. And then there's a more objective of, if we just see a lot of hemorrhaging time, meaning that like athletes are having excessive travel time from one station to the next, if we see lack there of compliance because we create a lot of blind spots, that's one I see quite a bit in college weight rooms, are these blind spots, meaning that your rack is here and they're doing accessory exercises in a far off land and they get a drink of water and they don't come back. There's that, or there's just not doing the A2 and they come back to the original rack, and you see either checking it off, or you see I'm going to do everything on the whistle, and people just figure out ways to hide. You see maybe a lot of blind spots in coaching things that are absolutely necessary, right? How can we change something if we can't see it? That's a big deal. And the final aspect, which I think is really, as you start to really feel this, like, this doesn't feel right, it's what is the ingress egress? And there's whole sciences and architecture, and what is the flow, what is the feng shui, what is the symmetry of a room, what is the traffic pattern we want to do. We could look at the actual migratory pattern of a weight room from like a drone shot, or a like one of those cameras that do time lapses. Or we can just look at what part of the turf and what part of the floor is getting beat up repeatedly. That's the pattern in which we see people going. And you have to ask yourself, this is the beaten path that is organically evolved based off of people figuring out the best way to get in a weight room, go to their station, and then get out. And we have to wonder, is that the most efficient, most linear path to getting as much quality work within the weight room? Because time is a commodity in strength conditioning. We probably are working with, on average, on a good week, 120 minutes, on a really good week, 180 minutes. On a bad week, you're lucky to get 60 minutes. And if we're spending 3 to 5 minutes with just bad ingress egress, and you compound that over time, now we're eating into precious minutes that deteriorate your program. So if we get one session a week of 60 minutes and 5 minutes are really spent just people trying to navigate when they don't have to, man, that's a big percentage point over a large period of time. And all that stuff matters a great deal when you're looking at your philosophy. Like, I'm going to do compound multi-joint movements in a closed kinetic chain environment. I'm going to use antagonist pairing. So I'm going to do a push and a pull. I would like to get at least 20 sets in a 45-minute period of these big multi-joint movements. Okay, well, if I can get that, and I need to go a certain level of threshold intensity based off the rep max, and there's going to be a limitation to the time I can do that, because I have to either compromise rest or have to cut total actual density and volume, man, like, you're leaving performance on the table by not really being in this harmonious relationship with thinking about how can you tweak, how can you move, how can you adjust, how can you align your weight room to accommodate the philosophy that you may have. It might be the right philosophy, and no one could say that until we after get to it's an output measure. But the logistics, or what can we actually execute on in that real world practical solution, that's the part we just inherently create a lot of blind spots to.
So we can't really change ingress egress points. So that specific example, I'm curious, how would you go about addressing that limitation?
You absolutely can,
Well, I
right?
mean,
So
in terms of like my doors are here, my doors are not going to change. So how would you work through
if you
that?
have a rack in front of the door and they have to turn left, you can move the rack to the opposite side and they could turn right. So you can absolutely change ingress, right? So if you have something directly impeding or directing traffic patterns, right? You think about a stream and you put a big rock there, the water goes around the rock. If I move the rock to the opposite side, it goes the opposite way. So if I look at it from an ingress egress, and I look at the things that are malleable within that environment, you can form a more appropriate ingress. We could use your weight room, for example. You have racks down the middle of your weight room, and people enter on the opposite side of your desk, and they probably exit on the same side as your desk, maybe hypothetically. All right, so they walk into the room, and let's say that you like to have all racks being used. The ingress that you could have is the first people in there go straight to that last farthest rack, and then the last person goes to the closest rack. So you
Mhm.
have saved time there. Let's say that that's not really allowing you for you to execute your program, and you want to have more open space. So I'm going to take my racks and I'm going to go on the bookends of the room. So when they walk in, it's just big open space, and I line everyone up at the first racks that are mirroring each other, so we can do a dynamic warm up. Maybe we want to do something different of I want to have this like station like format where I have a cluster of 4 racks, 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 and we just start everyone through. So to answer your like, can we change that? We absolutely can. And that is a thing you need to look at from, is this going to allow me to execute on my philosophy? Is this going to be the most efficient and most economy wise looking at my time that I have with my athletes? We can organize our space. And one of the things that I think we often take for granted when we have a space is the knowledge that this weight room was designed perfectly. And I could tell you this. Now I've designed countless number of weight rooms that once I get a rendering, I know that is the first iteration of what I think this program is going to look like and feel like. And once I get to that point of actually seeing, feeling, and smelling a workout and looking at that, going, okay, this could be better. Where would I need to put certain pieces of equipment? How do I line people's ingress and egress? What do I want to do? What's the gap that I have from a movement prep perspective, from a actual power or speed development perspective, from a training perspective, from even a post work or conditioning work perspective, to allow for the minimal transit time, maximal work time, and people feeling like it's not in a overly chaotic environment.
How do you know when it's like, okay, we just need a small tweak versus, all right, we got to reorganize this whole room based off the equipment we have?
So let's say that we want to get 20 sets in a given workout. And one of the things that I ask in my evaluation is, did we get through the entire workout?
Mhm.
And one of the things we'll evaluate was, did the coach keep good timing? Did they account for rest periods? So if I got 20 total sets in a 45-minute period, and I'm going to do 10 sets in the A series and then 10 sets in the B series, and I want to get 1 minute after A1, 1 minute after A2 in terms of rest periods, and that times out perfectly to 45 minutes. And we get through a day and we look through it and I'm like, all right, like one group didn't get through it. Coaches got off task. Like they did not control the room. They lost the room. They started to get on tangents, had sidebar conversations. Athletes weren't really taking that rest period seriously, and they just didn't finish. And then they walk out. Then we start to see a repeat pattern, and we have to look at it from, all right, well, from a programming perspective, does this actually time out the way I think it times out? Hypothetically, it should, because I mapped it all out. 45 minutes is our window of training time, and the work to rest is prescribed perfectly. We're optimizing each minute. Alternatively, if they can't get to B2 in under a minute because they got to grab a piece of equipment or they got to go to another station 3 minutes away, or there's a logjam effect, I'm not going to be able to get through that workout. So that goes into a either overhaul of my program or an overhaul of the weight room. And you got to just ask yourself in that question, what's the quicker, easier, more effective fix? And I could cut sets, but I definitely think it matters how much total tonnage or how much density or how much you're getting of these big ROI movements. So the other alternative, and it might require some actual manual labor, is how do we get better transit time from A1 to A2? And then how do we get better turnover time from A2 to B1? And it could be as simple as like, let's not put the benches all the way in the dumbbell area. It could be as simple as, hey, we got 6 racks, 3 glute hams. All 3 of the glute hams on the other side of those racks. So we might need to reserve that we might need to adjust where those glute hams are located. And that might mean moving a rack or two. It could be a whole host of things. But the other end of it is, okay, well, I got these pieces of equipment, but logistically it just doesn't work out. So I need to get rid of it. And one of the things that you always are going to have to incur is the difference in programming or the nuance in program between a half rack, a full rack, having things like cable columns attached to your rack, having things like multiple pull-ups and where those aligned, are they in front of the rack and behind the rack, having things like bar catches or pins or safety catches, all these little like rack nuances create drastic butterfly effect in terms of what you're going to be able to accomplish in a given 45-minute training session. And that is the part that, as you start to look at what's the quicker, easier, more effective fix, sometimes it's the right call. Just change your program. Sometimes it's, I just got to move pieces around because we can't get the people on these north side racks to the south side to do this B2.
Really, it kind of boils down to making sure you have some sort of criteria to evaluate the session itself.
Yeah. I prescribed A1, A2, B1, B2, a push pull, and I wanted to get 20 total sets with a minute break in between A1 and A2, and then the same thing in B1, B2. And I couldn't get there. And then we started to inventory why, and evaluating the coach, evaluating the space, evaluating the program. We're all on the dock of looking at this and saying, okay, this is something that we need to address. And we need to get on the coach and say, you need to keep the pace. We need to keep people moving. We need to align the room, or we probably maybe need to revisit the program.
Sweet. Well, Tim, this was awesome. I really think this season is going to be a great one. So make sure everyone keeps tuning in.
See you, buddy.